It was the fire that changed America.
The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire was a turning point in the history of worker safety in the United States.
Back in 1911, there really were no safety protections. There certainly wasn't a strong government role.
The Triangle Fire fueled the rise of organized labor and inspired decades of reform. But today, the legacy of workplace safety is under attack.
These children are sacrificing their health, their childhoods, their futures.
The penalty for willfully killing a worker in America is $7,000.
We've seen this time and again. You abuse workers, take away their power, and pretty soon you start killing them.
Then we just come to work here. We don't come to die.
Factories had burned before, and workers had died in greater numbers. But the fire on March 25, 1911, at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was different. Just a year earlier, the seamstresses of the Triangle Factory had led the first successful strike of women workers in American history. Now, some of those same women were perishing in flames. Factory managers had locked doors to the stairwells, leaving many with no way out but the windows on the 9th floor. In just 18 minutes, the fire claimed 146 lives. One of the first witnesses was Frances Perkins, executive secretary of the Consumers League.
We heard the engines and we heard the screams and rushed out and rushed over where we could see where the trouble was. And the people had just begun to jump when we got there. And every one of them was killed. Everybody who jumped was killed.
Her actually viewing the fire was a critically important fact because it affected her so much that in her work that she did in those next few years with the Factory Investigating Commission, she used the same technique. She brought the members of the commission to see the working conditions. She brought them to a cannery where they could see 5- and 6-year-olds working at 6 o'clock in the morning with their mothers. She brought them to a rope factory where husbands and wives worked alternating 12-hour days. She used to say they kissed each other on the way in. One was going in, one was going out. That was the only time they saw each other. My favorite story is that she made then State Senator Robert Wagner go down the fire escape in a factory, and the fire escape was a hole in the wall and you went down a rope.
The light Perkins shined into the lives of workers helped usher in 36 new laws that set minimum wages and maximum hours, limited child labor, and created codes for safer factories. When New York's Governor Franklin Roosevelt became president, he made Perkins Secretary of Labor.
All of us are proud to work in a building named after Frances Perkins, because when we go back and we read what she said and the things she did, she was far ahead of her time thinking about ways that the government could address problems.
Dr. David Michaels heads the Department of Labor's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, an agency born 40 years ago during a second great wave of workplace reform.
All through the 1950s and 60s, the high rate of fatalities in workplaces continued unabated. There were estimates that 15,000 workers were killed every year on the job. That's 37 workers being killed every single day in the United States. But in 1970, Congress passed the Occupational Safety and Health Act. It was signed by Richard Nixon. And for the first time, workers had the right to a safe workplace. Employers had to provide safe working conditions.
It's estimated that OSHA has saved the lives of over 400,000 American workers. But still today, some 5,000 workers die on the job each year, and 50,000 die slowly from occupational diseases, such as cancers caused by exposure to toxic chemicals.
In some ways, we're going backwards. Having put in place laws, put in place systems of safety and health in the workplace, some of that's eroding.
Part of the problem comes down to the cost for employers of letting workers die on the job. After the Triangle Fire, the factory owners, Max Blank and Isaac Harris, paid the victims' families $75 per fatality, but they collected over $400 per worker in insurance. 2 years later, a judge found Blank guilty of locking the doors to another one of his factories. His fine, $20.
We have this problem again today. The ruthlessness of some employers, not all by any means, but some, is encouraged by the fact that we have almost no deterrence against it in our job safety laws.
If a willful violation of OSHA results in a worker's death, it's only a misdemeanor. And it's only a misdemeanor against the company. And since you can't put a company in jail, it means it's just a fine.
The subcommittee will be in order.
And when Congress created the OSHA law, they didn't allow the penalties to rise with inflation. So the real cost of OSHA fines today is 39% lower than in 1970.
What we saw last year was that the median penalty when a worker was killed in this country was $5,000. $5,000, and that's, 2010.
As long as it's cheaper for an employer to have an employee die on them than to fix the problem, there will continue to be a problem. Thank you.
That doesn't send a message.
David Michaels has drawn attention to the fact that OSHA's fines are dwarfed by those of other federal agencies.
A violation of the South Pacific Tuna Act, where you catch tuna or endangered, can be a $350,000 fine. If a dairy refuses to contribute to the fund that all the dairies put into to promote milk and dairy products, the Agriculture Department can fine them $150,000. But if a worker dies, the $7,000 the maximum for a serious citation.
The victims of the Triangle Fire were immigrants, and nearly half were in their teens. Today, huge numbers of immigrant children still work in one of America's most dangerous industries, agriculture.
Many people would be amazed to know that there are between 400 and 500,000 children out there working in the fields. Under current U.S. law, children as young as 12 years old are allowed to work in agriculture with unlimited amount of hours as long as it's outside of school. They are exposed to poisonous pesticides, are allowed to use dangerous farm equipment, sharp tools like machetes, or even we've spoken to some children that are as young as 12 that use chainsaws. What does that say about us as a country, as Americans? These children are sacrificing their health, their childhoods, their futures, their educations, just for us to be able to have cheap food on our tables.
Lawmakers in Maine and Missouri have actually introduced bills that would repeal child labor laws.
And in Missouri, Republican State Senator Jane Cunningham has introduced a bill that would eliminate her state's child labor laws. Well, yeah, why should the 10-year-olds in China be getting all the good factory jobs, huh? Hey, 5th grade's not for everybody, okay? Exactly.
The bills to roll back child labor laws are just some of the more outrageous volleys in a massive attack on workers' rights. In 37 states, anti-labor legislation has been introduced, including bills to repeal minimum wage laws, ban prevailing wage standards, and destroy the right to collective bargaining. This assault is funded by Wall Street, industry trade associations like the National Association of Manufacturers and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and right-wing billionaires like the Koch brothers.
And they are exercising their muscle, trying in every place and in every way they can to roll back and eliminate the role of government in overseeing workplaces, overseeing the environment, but particularly roll back the rights of workers to have a voice, not just an individual voice, but a collective voice.
And the states that have seen the most intense battles reveal why a collective voice is key for workers' safety on the job.
In a lot of states, public employees have no OSHA protection. In Wisconsin, they're not covered by the OSHA Act. In Ohio, they're not covered by the OSHA Act. So they don't have a set of legal rights. So what they have is through their collective bargaining agreements.
And you take that away, what kind of power do workers have to speak up against the boss who's going to tell them, get on the back of that garbage truck and load those cans a little faster? Or go into that sewage treatment plant and hold your breath when the chlorine and the H2S comes up. Or go out in that construction site and don't worry about the fall protection. Those workers don't have any protection.
In the early 1990s, it looked like the tide might turn in favor of workers, that Congress might act to strengthen OSHA. As usual, the impetus was tragedy. In 1991, 80 years after the Triangle Fire, bosses locked the doors at the Imperial Chicken Processing Plant in Hamlet, North Carolina.
And one of the hoses broke, chemicals got into the ovens, onto the burners, place blew up in flames, and 25 workers died.
The owner said that they locked them in to prevent them from stealing chickens.
After the Hamlet fire, North Carolina passed 14 laws to improve working conditions. But getting Capitol Hill to act proved a bigger challenge.
The Congress took up the fight, put together a reform package to increase worker rights, to improve the penalties under the OSHA Act, to finally make it a real deterrent to say to employers, when you kill a worker, you're going to go to jail for real jail time. And within a couple of years, we had the 1994 elections, Newt Gingrich. That package died. 20 years later, we see the same legislation pending in the U.S. Congress now, the same Republicans opposing it, and the same employers in the Chamber of Commerce saying, oh, no, we can't have this, it's going to destroy jobs.
I've interviewed too many families that have lost people in the mine, and the time has come to stop that, and I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and let's honor the commitments that everybody makes the first 48 hours after one of these tragedies takes place, that we're going to make sure it never happens again.
It's something that I think that Americans really have to pay attention to. They pay attention to it if there's a disaster, but the time that it takes to get bills through Congress seems to outlive the attention span of a lot of people.
I think there's always been a myth that workplace safety and successful businesses are incompatible. The reality is, well-managed firms are safe firms. They make a good profit and they don't kill workers. Badly managed firms that don't take safety into account, are problems across the board. They're problems for the economy and problems for the workforce. We have to help overcome that myth that safety doesn't pay.
I mean, the idea that workers go into the workplace not knowing whether they'll return home at the end of the day, that's immoral. So it really is a moral issue that workers should have the right to show up at work, do their job, and come home safe and sound. So that's really what's at stake here. Do we value the right of workers to be protected on the job? That's what's at stake.